The Unrelating podcasts are meant to be for education and entertainment. They don't constitute a service or advice. For personal struggles, please reach out to a medical or mental health professional.
Hello, Michelle.
Hey, Kel.
How are you?
I'm good. It's good. I'm excited.
I'm excited too today. I'm feeling extremely positive about today's show. So, what do you think we're going to talk about today?
Well, funny you should ask. I am fascinated with this idea of whether or not we're generally optimistic or generally pessimistic about the world. Because I really do think that it affects our relationships. And I think that it's worth taking the time to identify what we are so we know how it plays into us.
Are you an optimist or are you a pessimist?
I don't know. It really depends on the day or depends on the minute sometimes. How about you?
I think I'm an optimist, except in the middle of the night sometimes. And then I'm a pessimist. But I do wonder though, like, what is the percentages? Like, how many people are actually optimist versus pessimist? I'd be really curious. I'm sure that those stats are out there somewhere.
Oh yeah, I'm sure someone's done that research. I don't know the numbers, but I don't know. I think a lot of people tie the concept of optimism or pessimism to circumstances, kind of like I just did. But it's inevitably, I guess, when what's going on in the world has a huge impact on how you feel. So it could be circumstantial. Then again, you seem to be very clear that you are an optimist. So I don't know.
Well, I'm super excited, Michelle, and I'm super positive for this episode. So let's find out. Welcome to Unrelating with Kel and Michelle, and I'm one of your hosts, Kelly. With me is my co-host, Michelle, a licensed marriage and family therapist who's been providing individual and couples therapy for over a decade. Together, we'll explore how we engage in relationships, why we do what we do, and what causes people to unrelate. So joining us today for this very special episode are Michelle's parents, Jose and Noemi, from Michigan, married 48 years. They're here today to talk about the concept of the optimist versus pessimist brain.
Yes, and Kel, I'm glad you made the distinction to put brain in that sentence. And it might just be semantics to some people, but instead of saying things like, I am an optimist or I am a pessimist, which is a character trait or a statement about who you are, what we're talking about today is an optimistic brain versus a pessimistic brain, which is about what we tell ourselves. And then, of course, what we do in response to that information.
When I think of myself, I think I'm an optimist, but obviously I struggle sometimes, and I'm not quite sure if everyone else has this exact same struggle, because it is hard to be optimistic all the time, especially with what's going on in the world. I just try to look at the bright side on things, and it's been really the past year, 2 years, it's been really hard. I can tell you that. With the pandemic and the news every day, being an optimist can be a struggle. So I think it's important to talk about what that means for everyone, because you can be maybe an optimist one day and then a pessimist the next day. And I think people kind of have to balance both of those. I can tell you, at 3 a.m, I feel like a pessimist. I wake up, I'm a little bit stressed. I feel a bit of anxiety. For some reason, that's just when it hits me the most. But for the most part, I really try to be optimist because I feel like that's, obviously very healthy for our bodies, healthy for our minds, healthy for our souls. I'm really curious to hear what Michelle has to say about this in terms of her professional opinion and also what our guests think.
Yeah, and I will definitely get to hear more about what Noemi and Jose have to say. And, for the sake of the show, I'm going to use their proper names, but of course, they're mom and dad to me. But I just want to first give a little background because I think, Kelly, you made some good points. And I really want to touch on this idea of trying to be one way or the other, because the goal of today is to figure out what's my inclination. Do I tend to look at things pessimistically or optimistically? Because, of course, there's a spectrum, right? And it can vary based on different factors. But our baseline inclination can really inform how we react to other people. We need to know what lens we see things through to comprehend why we're reacting the way we are to our partner, to our family, and then what preconceptions we're attaching to things. So before we dive in, I know I asked you in the open, are you an optimist or a pessimist? So I think I should probably answer the question too, because I kind of dodged it. You know how I know I have an optimistic brain, Kel? Well, this is totally a silly example, but it's really tangible for me, so I'm going to share it. I know I have an optimistic brain because I'd say at least once a year, I buy a spaghetti squash. And I will truly believe that I will cook that thing and eat it instead of pasta. Now, ask me how many times I've done that.
How many?
Zero. Never. I may have actually cooked it once or twice, but then it sat in a container in the fridge and then it ended up getting thrown out. But that's my brain, right? It confidently says to me, maybe this time I'll eat it. But anyway, I want to turn to our guests, and I can already see Nomi shaking her head like, nope, that's not me. So I want to hear what's going through your head right now.
Well, it's interesting because for me, it changed through the years. Let's say, I would say that right now I have a pessimistic brain and it's a 3:00 in the morning pessimistic brain, like you, Kel. But when I was younger, I didn't. I had a very optimistic brain. And in fact, a lot of people call me Pollyanna because I always saw the bright side of things. As the years went by, and you live a lot of things that are not pleasant, and the years keep going and you're getting old, I'd say right now I have a pessimistic brain. My first thought is always the glass is half empty. Mm-hmm. And so I have to convince myself. My heart says that. And then I have to push myself to think that things will be okay. But my first feeling, my gut feeling is always no.
Yeah, I agree. You have that. You and I have that in common. Jose, what is your take on that?
Well, when I was a young boy growing up in Argentina, I was very pessimistic because the economic situation of my family was not very good. And I had to struggle to go to school, and I had to struggle to go to college, and I had to struggle to finish my education. So it was always a struggle. And I was pessimistic about life and about my future. But in later days, when we came to this country and I started working for General Motors and I started socializing with other people, learning a lot of things, and I was able to go and get my MBA, I changed to a very positive view, not only of life, but also of family. So recently, I feel like I am optimistic because I see the glass as half full. I see a better future. And I fight for a better future for people. I also think that even with the pandemic and the political turmoil of this country, I believe that we will go ahead and we will find solutions. We will protect the environment, care about supporting other people, etc. So I have a very optimistic view of the future. So I went also from a very pessimistic kid to be an optimistic senior citizen.
It's interesting how you guys are opposites in that way. The way you both flipped your inclination as you grew up and in an opposite way. And that makes me think, Jose, I have a question for you. If you're walking around in the world and your brain is telling you the glass is half full, like you said, things are going to be okay, how do you think that plays into your relationship? If, say, Nomi comes at you one day and, she's irritating you for some reason, how do these messages from your brain saying the glass is half full, how does that affect your response to her?
Well, I try to convince Nomi we will have a good future, that the future is bright, that people are realizing that we need to protect the environment, that the nuclear war and terrible things can destroy this planet, and that being very selfish or very greedy is not good. And the power of giving and the power of sharing good feelings are more important than reading local news every day or getting upset by watching TV.
So, do you both think that being married for 48 years, having to adjust and meld with one person for that long has changed your brain in terms of whether you think things are good versus bad in your relationship?
I think that what happens is that it keeps transforming. One transformed to one side and the other side to the other side. And also, we're definitely affected by each other. One always lifts the other, or one will push the other down to join the pessimism. For example, Jose likes to take a walk around the neighborhood after dinner, but I'm always like, no, it's too hot, it's too cold, whatever. I'm tired, whatever. Or I'm just thinking for reasons not to go. But he tries to motivate me. And when I do say yes, it ends up being great. And I'm glad we did it. Sometimes he actually convinces me to change my mindset and I want to go. Other times I still don't want to go, but I go anyway because I know he likes it.
I can give you another good example. We worked for many years in Argentina. Naomi worked at the university and I worked for the government. And when we came to this country, we realized that we could have a retirement from Argentina. So I spent a lot of time talking with lawyers, finding ways of how can I get my retirement funds and those funds be transferred to the United States. And it took me like 2 years of persistence, perseverance, but finally I got my retirement. It's only $200 a month, but it's $200. And that $200 helps. So Nomi didn't want to do anything with her retirement. She would say, nah, it took you so many years. It's going to take me 4 or 5, and I probably will never get it. Argentina can just keep my funds. I don't care about retirement. But I convinced her to let me do her paperwork. And another 2 years went by, and finally, she got her retirement. So now she gets a check every month, and it's one of many examples where she says, nah, I'm not going to do it. Nothing good will come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep saying, let me try. And many times we are successful. So I'm always trying to persist, to be perseverant.
Yeah, earlier, Jose, you mentioned, coming to this country and feeling optimistic. And it reminds me of images of the early 1900s where people would come to America from another country and they'd see the Statue of Liberty and they were thinking, people from all over the world. And they were so optimistic because this was just a new life for them. That's kind of how I envision when you talk about this, because I do feel like it's a chance to start over. America is this, I guess America has this melting pot kind of optimistic attitude, and it's sort of ingrained in our culture. I think that you touched on a really important point there, that the fact that you did both come from another country, and that sort of sculpted and defined your attitude of moving forward, versus someone who maybe grew up here and kind of takes it for granted, like me, and maybe doesn't appreciate that much, or doesn't appreciate it as much as he should. I don't know. I just found that really interesting point of view, and certainly I think a lot of people are like you, kind of an older generation that can really see things from a longer time frame and a longer sort of generational journey.
Yeah, no, I like that, Kel. And I appreciate your insight, because that's really a major theme of what we're talking about today. When you come at something with an optimistic lens, really the core feeling you're having there is hope, right? It's about seeing potential and possibility in the situation. And when you approach relationships that way, you're more likely to see your partner, even on a bad day, as acting in good faith and as being a positive thing. Your assumption is probably that your interaction with that person, it'll be neutral or even a positive interaction. And a lot of times when you're coming at things with a pessimistic view, where your brain is telling you, oh, I don't know, this could be bad. A lot of times when a partner or a family member, or I'd say even a coworker, as we all know, is approaching you, your brain is already priming the interaction and saying, oh, what now? This won't go well. And so something bad may end up happening because you're priming yourself to think something bad might happen.
Well, Americans, and I don't want to generalize, But Americans can be spoiled. They don't know what it is to live under a military dictator. They don't know what it is not to have freedom of expression or freedom of religion. For example, I was reading the other day that an American farmer is throwing away all his crops because he doesn't have people to come for $4 or $5 an hour to harvest them. So, because of the pandemic and other reasons, every place in Michigan says we are hiring. They are desperate for people. And I saw a sign at the fast food place that they said they will pay tuition, a higher wage, even a bonus to sign up. And this farmer, and I was shocked, was throwing away food because he couldn't find people to do the work. And some Americans don't want to do that work. But at the same time, we don't allow people from other places of the world to come and do it for them. So when you come from another country and you find the freedom that we found, and I'm talking about the 80s, things are changing in America today, of course. But when we came in, it was the land of honey. The issue was you work hard and you will get a decent life.
Yeah, and I want to highlight that because it goes to Jose's point about being spoiled and, that you talked about earlier. Because as a therapist, I will talk to you all day about ways to get your needs met. That's important, right? How important it is to get your needs met. We talk about that a lot, but I want to be clear that your needs don't matter more than your partner's needs. And I feel like I need to repeat that because some people may take offense, but I want it to be clear. Your needs don't matter more than your partner's needs. And vice versa, by the way. And Noemi, that story you told about understanding how much joy Jose gets from when you guys walk together, that really highlights that even though your brain was saying one thing, I don't want to do this, you were taking into account Jose's feelings and needs. And that ultimately changed your decision about whether or not to say yes to the walk, right?
That sounds like good balance to me in any relationship, by the way.
Well, That's what 48 years does to you. You got to do that. And I'm sure Jose does the same thing all the time with me. To put up with my pessimism, I don't want to do that and I don't want to do this. That's always me. Today, but I have to tell you, today's an important day for us, by the way.
Why? What's today?
Well, today's the day that we came here to this country 43 years ago.
Wow. So you guys are talking about your journey a lot today. That's because it's very present in your mind, huh?
Yep. 43 years ago is when we came to this country.
Wow.
And Noemi, how's that make you feel?
Well, it's interesting because we came with 2 suitcases and a child and a half. By the way, that half child was Michelle. I was 6 months pregnant when we came. So, yeah. So I can see now what happened to my half child, right? She has a family of her own. So these 43 years went by and a lot has happened. So there's a lot to think about and learn from.
And thanks for publicly declaring my age, by the way. 43. Very clear to everyone now.
Now, Nomi forgot to say, or she did, that we came with 2 suitcases, 1.5 children, and only $1,000 in cash that our relatives gave to us before we left. But we were welcomed by an American family that basically adopted us. We were living in Dearborn Heights, Michigan. They sponsor us and they help us to find a lawyer to do all the paperwork, immigration work, so we could stay in this country. This American family gave us a roof and friendship and love, and we lived with them for 1 year, and then we could get our own home. At that time, I was working, Nomi was working. I had 2 jobs, one from 8 to 5 and another from 8 to 12. And we were able to get a loan, and we were so happy to be able to buy our first house. It was a very, very little house, but We started from scratch.
Jose, that would make me really optimistic if I had that sort of backstory, because to do that, to make that huge move and come here, it's such a success story to me. And it would really change my outlook on life, if I achieved that, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, now we have 2 beautiful daughters, a son-in-law, 3 grandkids. What more can we ask for?
Yeah.
What
I
else?
know you guys accepted a Spartan into your household. I feel like that's pretty optimistic, man.
Yeah, exactly. That's a hard thing for a Wolverine to do. So in that sense, I'm very optimistic.
We also have a lot of friends, We belong to a lot of associations, groups, book clubs. Nomi is still doing research and teaching at the University of Michigan. I do a lot of volunteer work. I am a member of the Commerce Township Downtown Development Authority. So we are happy.
Yeah, a lot of reasons to be optimistic. So tell my brain that.
No, you tell your brain that, Nomi. I think part of this conversation is whether or not we feel we can control the narrative. Is it something that we're like, oh, well, I am what I am? Or are there actually moments where you can intervene for yourself? That's what I want to talk about today, because now that you know what your inclination is, are there ways you can adjust your feeling or thinking to benefit yourself and your relationship?
Well, obviously I can, but then I have to talk myself into it. It doesn't come automatically. My first reaction is no. And then I say, okay, but, and then I have to reason it all. So my brain has to do all the work because my heart won't do it.
Oh, I love that. And yeah, I mean, Kelly, you were saying the same thing earlier, where you're trying to be an optimist, like you're trying to make a conscious choice. There's an intentionality behind it. And if I can be so bold to say, there may even be an ability to control it in different situations, right?
Yeah. Kind of like, Michelle, so Michelle, they call it a dumb tax, but like if I buy a lotto ticket every week and then I'm surprised when I don't win, what does that make me? Am I an optimist? Am I a pessimist? Or am I just a masochist?
That's a great question. Well, what that makes you is someone who just likes to engage in fantasy, right? We all like to imagine what we do if we win the lotto. It's a nice little escapism. But you do make an excellent point, because there is a difference between having an optimistic slant and being in denial. Specifically, when we're talking about relationships, there can be a fine line between being optimistic and, say, like being in denial about red flags or unhealthy dynamics like that. Now, certainly, and I want to say this caveat always, if there are abusive or controlling factors, that's different. That's a whole other level. But when it's just kind of your run-of-the-mill writing on the wall about whether or not the relationship can thrive, that's not the time to be saying to yourself, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine, everything will work out. So I don't know. I guess generally speaking, there are deal breaker moments on both sides, like what I mentioned about being too rosy about things, but on the other end too, because, there's a certain sabotage a pessimist can engage in at the same time to prevent relationships from working out.
I still think I'm going to win one day.
I do too. Now, interestingly, in my relationship, my partner buys lotto tickets but doesn't check the numbers. So I don't even know what that is. I can't diagnose that. It's probably pessimism, right? Because, he assumes he's not going to win. But then again, he had to have had some hope to have bought it in the first place.
That's how I feel. I feel like, I'm optimistic because there's a chance. You're telling me there's a chance, no matter how small. I'm quoting that movie, Dumb and Dumber, by the way.
I love that movie.
I love it. So you're saying there's a chance.
Exactly. I just have to think that way. Honestly, I have to think certain things like this podcast and my marriage are going to be, they're going to be successful. It's just the way I want to approach life, because what's the alternative, right? I mean, there is no alternative. I'm not trying to be unrealistic. I'm just trying to be optimistic, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll tell you one thing, working with couples for as long as I have, if you believe your marriage will work, it is more likely to work.
Wow. This thing you're bringing up about the optimistic or pessimistic brains, I never thought how important that is to a relationship. when you mentioned it as a topic, I thought, what does that have to do with relationship? Now I really have to think about it.
Yeah, and that's the whole point, right? It's to get us thinking about these dynamics like, oh, you know what? This topic might actually be impacting my relationship.
Well, now, in order to show how much I have changed, how much I have learned staying in America, this example about the lotto tickets. I only play the lottery when the pot is 100 millions or more. And Nomi calls that greedy. You are greedy. But to be truthful, we also do a lot of volunteering work. So I can think a lot of organizations that can benefit if I win the Michigan or the Powerball or
Mm-hmm.
in general the lottery.
Yeah, and of course you'd want to share with family and friends too, right? Right, Kel? You and I, are we in there? But you actually just made me think of something, Jose, because I was reading some research being done recently that was correlating optimism with collectivism. And I guess based on the research, they were saying that people from more collectivistic societies who have that perspective of it takes a village or, that shared responsibility kind of vibe, that they found higher rates of optimism in those communities. There were, I guess, more feelings of hope and ability to persevere, the things that we're talking about today, because they felt more communal.
So as we start to wrap up, Michelle, what have you heard today that might help other people, and what should we try to do to change whatever's going on in our brain that's really affecting us? How does Nomi be less pessimistic, say, for example?
Yeah, great question. The first thing I'll say is that our brains, there's this thing called neuroplasticity, which just means our brains can change to a certain extent. They can be rewired. So it isn't all set in stone. The first thing to think is there's always some wiggle room if you're trying to change how you think, feel, or behave. The other thing I want folks to take away, and for Nomi too, is she's already figured out what her lens is, but for folks who are listening, what is your tendency? Try and answer that question and know where you're coming from. That's step one. And then, and this will sound counterintuitive, I think, but start to notice the situations in your life where it's not the case, where you're going against your tendency. So maybe, for example, you put your rose-colored glasses on when you're in relationships, everything's great, but you have a different lens in other areas of your life. Or conversely, maybe you have a very pessimistic view of relationships and those don't tend to work out, but otherwise you feel pretty optimistic as a person. So I guess a tangible example, if I may, are you a sports fan, Kelly?
Michelle, I am.
Yeah. Okay, so that's an example of a true optimist. Your team could be 30 points down, and your team often is. No, just kidding. But if, say, your team is losing terribly, 30 points down, and you're telling yourself, oh, no, we can rally. We can still win this. We're still in it. So if you tend to have a pessimistic brain and you're trying to break that dynamic, something like this, silly sports example, can prove to you that you do have it in you to feel hope and optimism. And sometimes changing our behavior in one setting is really helped by realizing that we're capable of it in the first place because we know we've done it in other settings. Now we have proof that we're capable of it. And, bottom line, to wrap up, what our brain is telling us about the world does have an effect on how we react to the people in our life.
Jose, Nomi, anything to add to that?
No, but this was really helpful. We have a lot to think about.
And that's all we're trying to do with the show, to start the conversation, start the thinking process. And it's interesting, Jose was very reflective today about his immigration story. And it's proof that when you start reflecting, that often helps you come to some conclusions about how you want to move forward and how you are in life.
I've never heard that perspective before, Jose. And for me, I found it really enlightening, really inspiring, quite frankly, hearing your personal story coming to this country. Thank you for sharing that, really.
Yeah, and thank you both also for being candid and being vulnerable and sharing what your tendency is so that we can learn from it, especially Nomi, to put it out there about the pessimism. We do call the show Unrelating because we talk about ways we tend to get in the way of our relationships and not relate to each other. But we also talk to couples like you because there really are so many universal themes that we can all relate to.
So special thanks today to our special guests, Michelle's parents, Jose and Noemi. Thanks for being here. Love talking with you.
Yeah, thank you for spending time with us. We really enjoyed it, and we also have a lot to think about. You put a lot in our brains.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Kelly. When do we get the first check?
That's being very optimistic.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, that was really cool. Hearing your parents' perspectives, the fact that one is a pessimist and one is an optimist. To me, it was really interesting to see that.
Yeah, I like that we had a couple that had one of each because I like to hear those perspectives. And it was also interesting because even though my mom said she hadn't thought about it, she did know that she was a pessimist, so she could identify it really easily, I guess. And then she's already on step 2, which is to then do something about it, right? To use certain techniques to kind of talk herself out of being that pessimistic thing for her, for the sake of her relationship. I think I found it fascinating that my dad focused his lens less on the relationship piece and more on just like his life in general, because I don't know. I thought that perspective was interesting, that his brain went to a more macro level dynamic than just his relationship.
Yeah, and the fact that they're older, they do bring a bit more of a different perspective than, like, say, our generation, for example.
Yeah.
They've experienced, life, a different life than we have, and I totally get it. If you're coming from a different country, how could you not be an optimist in some ways? People are usually coming here from pretty horrible situations. Usually, that's why they're coming here.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I liked, what I really liked is that it was a combination of the theme, like the topic that we were discussing, but it really was, like you said, a rich personal story, and a story that happens to be about the country we live in, but a really foundational piece to how the country came about.
So when they say it's insanity to do the same thing over and over and expect a different result, is that actually a person just being optimistic?
I don't know. I tend to think that person is probably just crossing the line from optimism to straight up denial, like I think we talked about earlier, because, denial is believing something in the face of like a lot of information or evidence that proves otherwise. So it's less optimistic than just kind of in denial when A leads to B, but you think somehow A is not going to lead to B the next time.
I mean, again, I'm trying to be optimistic. I can't not be optimistic. Maybe it's just the way I'm wired. I don't know. And it has nothing to do with my faith or my upbringing at all. I just firmly, believe that hard work, persistence, and having a positive attitude is going to work for me personally. I just have to have that foundation.
Yeah, because you're saying like there's no other way for me to be. I won't allow it. And that's true. I mean, there is another way to be, obviously. You could not be like that. You could be more pessimistic, but to you, that's a version of yourself that's not acceptable to you. So that's why you try really hard to be optimistic. And, it's definitely a chronic stressor to feel like things aren't going to work out all the time. It impacts your physical health, your mental health, to carry that feeling around all the time. So I get what you're saying about wanting to approach it in a different way.
Well, this has been a great talk, Michelle, as usual, and very positive talk. Thanks a lot.
Yes. Good talk. Good talk. Look at us go.
If you're struggling with family, friends, or coworkers, in a bad relationship and wondering what to do, or you want a relationship and to set yourself up for success, then we want to talk to you. So make your appointment on Unrelating. To be a guest, ask a question, or recommend a topic, drop us an email at theunrelatingpodcast@gmail.com. And be sure to follow us on Instagram or Facebook.